Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for what we hope is the first of many educational webinars provided by the American Gelbvieh Association. My name is Laura Hankey. I serve as the editorial contractor for AGA, and tonight I'll be moderating the discussion. Just a few notes before we get going here this evening. We wanted to take the opportunity to share that AGA is in no way in partnership with Agoro Carbon. We're not advocating or promoting any of their programs, and tonight's opportunity is purely educational. So we really wanted to provide the opportunity for our membership to ask questions and streamline that Q&A process. Secondly, all of your mics are muted for this evening's presentation. Please feel free to go ahead and ask any questions that you may have by clicking on the chat box located there on the right-hand corner of your screen. We've also structured the webinar to allow plenty of time for questions and answers here after the presentation tonight. And then finally, I do have just a couple of very short poll questions at the conclusion of tonight's discussion, and those will help us really get a feel for other topics that our audience may be interested in moving forward. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Larry and Travis and allow them to quickly introduce themselves, and we'll get this webinar started. Travis, let's go ahead and start with you tonight.
Let me unmute myself. My name is Travis Kidd. I'm an agronomist for Agoro Carbon Alliance. I'm based in Columbus, Texas. That's about halfway between Austin and Houston. And for the past 15 years, I've been an agronomist in the sorghum seed industry, where more of my focus was on research and development for new and existing traits, and bringing new hybrids into the market for both grain, forage, as well as different hay products.
Thanks, Travis. Good evening, everyone. Larry Hafer, Managing Director for the U.S. for the Agoro Carbon Alliance. And as Travis said, we're really excited to be here this evening and to visit with you about what we do, and really just provide some education from that standpoint. I live in Firth, Nebraska, which is southeast of Lincoln, not very far from where your head office is, and also spent a lot of years in the seed business. But also have maintained, and my family we run a registered cattle operation on a small level ourselves. So I'm just excited for the discussion and look forward to it.
All right, great. Travis, Larry, do you guys have a PowerPoint that you'd like to share? Go ahead and turn control over to you.
Absolutely. So let me share my screen. So meanwhile, again, my name's Travis. We work for Agoro Carbon Alliance. I want to thank Laura for inviting us. And a big part of my role as an agronomist is grower education. And, we're constantly looking at, different ways of getting growers into either a new practice or maybe thinking about different ways we operate on the farm or on the ranch. And I always look at on-farm research is one of the best ways we can get into discovering what works best, and and that way we can mitigate some risk. But a little introduction on who we are as Agoro. Our parent company is Yara International. So a lot of the times in the U.S., we hear the question, who is Yara? Well, Yara is one of the world's largest fertilizer companies, and they had this initiative to get into the carbon market. And as someone that is a large producer of greenhouse gases, this initiative with Agoro has allowed us to get in and actually help producers get into the carbon market. So one of the ways that we do that is, back to grower education, talking about the carbon cycle, what it is, what it isn't. One of the things that I like to tell producers, it's like, let's think about this photosynthesis. It's, carbon's going up and going down, going up and going down. Well, that's not the only thing it's doing. Plants pull in carbon dioxide, but they also, they're pulling that carbon dioxide in and they're creating those sugars. Well, that's 12 hours of the day. There's another 12 hours of the day. And those roots are breathing. And if you look at it in terms of an actual a chemical process, it's combustion. It's a combustion reaction. So, we're taking that sugar, adding oxygen, just like a fire, and we're producing CO2 and H2O. So the plants, they're also producing their own carbon dioxide during the day, but not all of it goes into the atmosphere. There's a pool that comes in and stays within the soil. So how did this all start? If you've ever heard of the Paris Accord Agreement, there was a little bit of a discussion about that. Our leadership within the United States decided not to get into that agreement, probably rightly so. There's, not to get too political, but, there was a lot of, everyone else can do this, but the United States has to pay for this. So, however, that created a voluntary carbon market within the globe. So who are these buyers? Who's going to be buying this? It's all of us. So if we look at if we go to the grocery store, or you go and purchase a pickup, or you go to purchase something at the store, a lot of our people in the market want to know that they're purchasing that from a sustainable practice, right? And that's able to open up this carbon market. So people are willing, and these companies are essentially willing to pay a sin tax, if you will, for their carbon emissions. So there's a lot of misinformation in the marketplace, and some of it is 2 and 3 years old, which if you work within the carbon market, 2 and 3 years is the equivalent of 100 years. There's lots of things that have been moving very quickly, but a big function of that is what is a carbon credit and what isn't, and how do you get involved. And so if I was a producer, a cattleman, I want to know exactly what it is that I'm getting into. So let's just read it out. A carbon credit is that tradable asset that grants the owner the right to emit CO2 into the atmosphere. Who is that owner? Well, that could be McDonald's, that could be Shell, that could be any one of the Fortune 500s, but not all Fortune 500s will be in this market, but it will be more like the Fortune 5000. So lots of different companies, lots of different buyers from across the globe. A carbon credit is essentially 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide. So it's and that's come from the atmosphere and placed into the soil. And how did we do that? Well, we did that through photosynthesis and through root growth. There is 2 different types of credits, and one that we really focus on is the second type here that I've laid out on this PowerPoint. The first one is a reduction in emissions. So it's more like if we could describe it as an emissions reduction or an emissions avoidance. So that's how much fuel did you burn last year versus this year? Well, if you didn't burn as much as you did last year, well, that's a reduction or an avoidance credit. And typically, if you look at the value of that, that's probably a little bit less than what we would consider the second option. And that's increasing the amount of CO2 pulled out and placed in the soil compared to a baseline. And that's called sequestration. So how do we create these credits? Well, in agriculture, there's a variety of different ways and lots of different farming practices, such as reducing tillage. This would be looking at no-till, strip-till, vertical till, these certain types of things, getting away from disking and moldboarding. Planting cover crops either winter or spring cover crops. And then looking at applying our fertilizer in a more responsible way. There's always that discussion about reducing fertilizer, but we know what reducing fertilizer does. That's going to reduce yield potential in row crop scenarios. But we look at applying nitrogen with, say, a denitrification product where we're, putting that out slow and a slow release program. I also want to make another note on that. As a fertilizer company, Yara, we follow the 4R program, where we're looking at putting the right rate, the right product at the right rate, at the right time, at the right place. So we want to make sure that our crops can take advantage of those. Another thing is what's called adaptive multi-paddock grazing, which here in the United States we refer to as rotational grazing. We look at adapting that rotational grazing program. Now, not every property is the same, and not every field is the same size, and we understand splitting say 500 acre field or a 3,000 acre field and putting it into rotational grazing program has its challenges. And then increasing crop or cover crop diversity. So looking at adding different biodiversity, different types of species, whether that be adding higher performance grasses into our pastures, and looking at different perennial cropping systems. So, these carbon credits can be either reduction credits or those sequestration credits. One vocabulary word that comes to mind here is additionality, and we call it the additionality conundrum within the company. So, a carbon credit is essentially, you've taken that baseline, what we go out and we do some soil sampling, and we've created a baseline. And so once a practice has been adopted, that change or that delta in the soil testing over a period of time, that delta is what the carbon credit actually is. It's that increase or that sequestration based on the approved adopted practice. Looking at different carbon contracts, they're kind of restrictive and lengthy, and that's because of our buyers. So the buyers have a point to, they want to make sure that they're purchasing something of value. So we make sure that we've come in and created that additionality. So additionality is above and beyond the status quo. So if you had a soil sample come back and you didn't adopt anything and you still had an increase in carbon, it's not because of additionality. So that requirement is sometimes hard to get our heads wrapped around, and including me as an agronomist, it was, well, if the soil carbon goes up, that should be a credit. But it was going to happen either way because of Mother Nature on that particular soil sample, but it's not additional. There needs to be a new adopted practice. So, and that's essentially what I covered on that slide. So how do we get paid? How do we get involved? There's two different types of contracts out there in the marketplace. So this is for you to know. One is a practice-based contract. So a company comes to you and says, I will pay you to adopt this practice at, say, for example, $3 an acre or $7 or $10 an acre. And that money is paid out no matter what the carbon sequestration value is. So it's just a practice-based contract. The other type is an outcome-based contract. So we look at the amount that is sequestered, and then those growers or those producers are paid based on what's on those soil samples. looking at kind of how the market works, going from top left to right. We get a credit that's generated by a farmer or producer, cattleman, and those producers have adopted that practice change. And then there follows a verification and certification process. And this is
Travis,
kind
it
of,
might just be me, but I'm just seeing a white screen.
are you just seeing a white screen? Uh-oh. Let me go back. Is that this? Can you see that?
Yeah. How do growers get paid?
Yes. And that one?
There you go. Yep.
Okay.
Got it.
So that verification and certification program, that's where we go to our verifiers. We get audited to make sure that, you know, there's no fraudulent activity, and make sure that we've done this through a scientific process. So they verify that we've done our homework and we've actually sequestered carbon. We've shown that the practices have changed. The soil carbon is present and increased. And then once that audit has been completed, we get that certification. And then those metric tons of carbon become carbon credits. And then those buyers can then purchase those. Now they'll purchase that from us, and that allows us to pay producers. So, however, remember our company is backed by Yara, and so we have several different ways to get growers paid up front, and so that can cause some confusion based on, you know, practice change or outcome based, but we do a little bit of forward contracting. How's that price of carbon credit determined? So this is always a hot topic. It's still in the early stages, you know, still trying to figure out exactly how that's going to look. Is there going to be an index? You know, is there going to be, you know, like a ticker at like with the stock exchange? And I think my personal prediction will be it'll probably approach that, and look kind of like the CME. So, but that's still yet to know. But one thing we do have to know is that this is essentially an over-the-table exchange between one company and a producer currently, and that's what it looks like today. Is it going to change? We don't know, but you know, with it being an over-the-table transaction, we're trying to look at it in terms of the easiest economics that I can think of, and that's where we're paying for a product at the fair market price, and we're trying to get a fair market price from our buyers, which would be the Fortune 500s or the mini 5,000 companies. So let's look at a case study. So you've got a property, and that grower signs a carbon contract, and it is a 10-year contract. Why 10 years? Well, the 10-year contract is because, you know, sequestering carbon is a biochemical process. It takes a long time. But this grower, producer, let's say he's agreed to adopt a biodiversity planting project with fertilizing virgin acres. So this is my terminology, not anybody else's. I look at planting, you know, higher performing grasses or legumes for, you know, nitrogen and carbon sequestration, and then fertilizing virgin acres. So, you know, we're looking at changing the landscape. So instead of thinking of fertilizing a pasture, think about fertilizing the property and large swaths of property. Anywhere from 5 to 15 units of N on some virgin acres has the ability to sequester a lot of carbon across the landscape. And then that grower also wants to adopt a rotational grazing program. And because of all of those three practices, we predict that grower is going to increase the soil carbon at about a half a ton per acre per year. And in his baseline carbon value is sitting at about 100. So we move 10 years down the road. All of these practices has been, that practice has been adopted. And after 10 years, that person increases about 5 tons of carbon per acre. So we essentially think about it in terms of 5 carbon credits, right? And then if the average price of carbon credit over the length of the contract was about $20, then that would be close to $100 an acre over a 10-year contract. So it's a considerable amount of money that a producer can make. And we do have contracts on range and pasture and row crop ground. So it's something to think about. So how are we measuring this? So when you think about measuring soil carbon, this is pretty difficult. It's not exactly like row crop soil sampling. We go out and we soil sample and we grid sample or sample by zones, and then we can batch sample those, ship them off to the soils lab, and get back our pH, CEC, NPK, and micronutrient values pretty quickly. A lot of times within 7 to 14 business days, we can have all of those done. They're batch processed, and they can get out of the door really quickly, get us back that data. Soil carbon is a little bit different. Think of it more like a university style research project. It takes a while. These samples have to be dried. They have to be a little bit deeper. So this is we're looking at soils that are at least 2 foot deep, 24 inches. And then we also have to have a bulk density sample, and that bulk density sample allows us to do some algebra, right? We have to convert percent carbon to equivalent units of carbon dioxide. And so essentially we do a little bit of math problems, and then we figure out our baseline over time. So some of the benefits of sequestering carbon, in grad school, I was always taught that the best predictor for long-term yield stability within a farm or range and pasture scenario was soil carbon. Increased soil carbon helps with water holding capacity. It helps with nutrient cycling. Our CEC goes up, cation exchange capacity, and then it also helps feed our bugs, our microbial activity. So every time I know that we're feeding microbe or we're feeding fungi, I know my grass grows better in those areas. Think about it where you feed hay. You're not only feeding hay, you're also those animals that are sitting around that hay ring. They're also leaving a lot of nutrient there and feeding the soil microbes, and then those soil microbes cycle that nutrient quicker, and you can also see that performance there. Instead of thinking about it around a hay ring, now think about it across the landscape. It gives us some more resilience to abiotic stress, such as heat, excessive rainfall, or excess drought. A lot of our producers that are listening right now may be experiencing one or all of those. And down south, that heat has turned on pretty quickly, and it's heading north. So, and then when it does rain, it helps us with our water infiltration. So, soil carbon and soil organic matter, I want to say that soil carbon and organic matter has 10 times the affinity for water than the actual soil does. So organic matter has to be, saturated in order to give it back out to the soil. So there's a moisture sink there. Now, some of the trade-offs of having carbon sequestration, is that both carbon sequestration and our nitrous oxide emissions are related. So there may be a little bit of a coupling there. So, because you're feeding microbes, those microbes are also respiring and giving off gases. So it's food for thought. Now, this is a quote from Gabrielle Popkin's 2021 article, and it's something that I want to say. It says, "I have the nature and properties of soil in front of me, the standard textbook," and it says Greg Sanford, a soil researcher at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, "The theory of soil organic carbon accumulation that's in the textbook has been proven mostly false, and we're still teaching it." So, as an agronomist, I don't know everything. I do have a few principles that I like to abide by and follow, but it doesn't make up for a lack of experience. So one of the things that we like to know, I know when I walk onto a different property and I meet a new producer, that person is a expert on their own property. And so we don't come out and try to tell people how to farm or tell people how to ranch. I'm pretty sure that most of the listeners could really give me a schooling on cattle. I'm not a cattleman. I'm an agronomist and a plant scientist. And so I look at plant breeding, and that's how I try to identify with growers and how animal performance is tied to plant performance. And so if we can help out plant performance, those ranchers can help on the animal performance side, and then make a little money on this carbon market. So with that, we're going to open it up to questions.
I was going to say a couple things that I think would help maybe paint the picture a little bit for the audience as well. So, if you look at, different programs that obviously you folks have access to. One, let's use an example of the Balance or Edge program. So, from my little knowledge of it, there's 5 steps that you have to go through to create that value in that animal to benefit from a program like that. The carbon credit and working with a carbon credit company is very similar to that. There's certain steps and certain process that you work together with along the way to achieve that same value and to bring value to it. I think what's really interesting in the market today is the demand for these credits outweighs the supply to a great degree. It's exciting that there's an opportunity for this kind of income to come into agriculture and to work with producers to do that. We're a little bit unique because we have spent quite a bit of time, more so in the range and pasture piece, in the ranch land, pasture land part of it, because not only Travis talked about additionality, but permanency is something that's talked about a lot. And grassland is usually fairly permanent. It is what it really means. And so it's one of the processes that you look at from that standpoint. So I think there's some really good opportunities. Every farm is unique and every ranch is unique. And that's where, having those individual conversations is really important to determine what the opportunities are from a ranching standpoint. So I just wanted to add a few of them points to just kind of, different ways to look at, how this all works, and that the 10-year contract seems like a long time, but it's this to really get the benefit for your operation. That's really the amount of time that it takes to do it. So I noticed that you got a question there too, Laura.
Yeah. So guys, let's talk about this contract a little bit more.
Yep.
First question that came in, are there penalties for the rancher if they decide to cancel the contract before the 5 years are up? So is there an option for a 5-year, or is everything 10-year?
So within our program, this is a 10-year contract. And what we're looking at, what are the buyers buying? Well, they're wanting permanence, and they're wanting, additionality. And so I don't think 5 years would be enough for a producer to really sequester enough carbon to be worth it. And I think that once a producer gets past 5 years, it's very likely that that producer would stay the course. Because not only within our program, there's a payment at 5 years, but this is an annual payment for the first 5, followed by another 5 years. And so there's another payment coming on year 10 within our program. I can't speak for others, but there are programs that kind of mirror ours. And so I don't think there would be very many ideas of, trying to back out of a contract. But we do have 2 payment options. One would be if the producer, adopted these practices, and then after 5 years, they get one lump sum payment, or they have another different payment option, and that would be to receive annual payments based off of prediction. So we have a pretty confident prediction. It's a conservative number, but if you say you stack practice A, B, and C, it gives us a decent number. And then we can forward contract on that. So we can pay based on what we think is going to be in the soil every year. And then we look at year 5, and then year 5 soil sample tells us what our prediction is. If were we correct? Was that producer underperforming, which is no harm, no foul? That's our risk. And that's why we place agronomists in the field to give that technical advice in terms of what the practices are. And then, I think the only penalty would be if they were to forward contract and then back out. That's where they would end up having to probably owe that money back. Now, there are certain things that happen within the environment that are what we consider acts of God, and that cannot be helped. And those are things that we do have to mitigate our risk on. But a penalty, I wouldn't think of it as a penalty on certain acts of God.
And if you're receiving the upfront payments and the advance payments, if a person is if you do wish to get out of that arrangement, those dollars in our contract are required to be paid back. I think it's notable to determine that we try to work really closely with our customers, in the fact that we hope that we're on this journey together and we can work through that, realizing those things happen. There's a lot of question about transfer of ownership of land. That's also why the ranch land piece interests us. It doesn't probably change hands as much as what row crop can in some instances. I think what's really unique is there is a penalty to if you want to withdraw from the contract early. That's something that we have to visit about and talk through it. But those things can happen. I think what's interesting is something unique about our contract is if the carbon market is much higher than the predicted model, we share in that profit with the producer. And so the upside is yours. The downside, we take the risk on that if the market happens to be less, and that's where a 10-year contract also helps you balance those dry years and those different years out that Travis was talking about, those acts of God. But I think something that's really interesting is our ability to share in the upside if this market continues to get really strong, and have that opportunity for folks to look at that. So,
great
question.
Yeah. Next question here. How often do the agronomists have to visit the ranch every year per the contract?
So, the agronomists are not required to actually go to a ranch. It's not in the contract that they have to go for these visits. But in a row crop scenario, it's more often. So there's as Mother Nature throws us curveballs, we've got to start thinking about different things. Well, is my cover crop mix going to be okay? It's getting a little dry for this. Maybe go a little more conservative. What do you think? Those kinds of conversations happen a lot more frequently on a row crop scenario. But we do have a customer success team. And we have all of the capabilities like this webinar here. We can Zoom and get on Google Meets or Microsoft Teams and talk. And then we like to follow up with at least all of our contract holders. We like to follow up with them quarterly, just to reach out and let them know that, hey, we're still here. And if you need anything, some things may have changed over that 3-month period. And then they want to follow up with us. Hey, I'm going to do this. Is that good for carbon, or is it going to pull me back? And so we like to think about it that way.
Mm-hmm. And sorry if I missed this on my part. How many times a year or during the contract will you actually have boots on the ground on your ranch doing something?
Go ahead, Travis.
I was going to say, so there's at least 3 periods that we have to be there, and that's for our verification. So for soil sampling, and then there's, no more boots on the ground have to be there. We can use, like I said, our technology and use that to our advantage. But yeah, we definitely need to take at least 3 soil samples before, during, and after.
I would also say that, we're probably annually is probably what you can expect, because there are annual requirements of data. And the reason part of that is from the verification standpoint, to make sure that we're continuing to build the data set for a very high quality credit that's very marketable, so that the carbon you are sequestering is of the highest value and can be marketed through our project at the highest level possible. And so, I think that, you surely would see somebody annually, and it could be more than that if you're requesting. And our agronomists are there to help. If you're wanting to look at other practices and other things that over time we may have available for the ranch. And so it's a really close working relationship. Like Travis said, some of it's in person and some of it is virtual as well. But I would see it as a minimum of probably you see somebody annually for sure, just because it's critical to address those key data points that we need, which isn't really that complex. But it's important to make sure that we have those recorded so that we can market that product for you the best we can.
Great. Okay. All right. Next question here. If we fertilize native grass and grow more, if we up the stocking rate, will the carbon in the soil still go up, or do you need to hold the stocking rate the same?
So more hooves on the ground. If you fertilize a native grass, we're talking that 5 to 15 units, we can get a pretty decent crop response. If that, and it's a case by case basis, right? So, your pasture there may be different than the one that I'm thinking of. If it can support that, more hooves on the ground can actually help us sequester more carbon. We do want to be smart about it and make, smart farming and ranching decisions based on how much biomass we have on top of the soil. We don't want to overgraze that. But it's this ebb and flow of, we're removing this biomass and we want to keep a little bit there. I look at plant life as, little solar panels, right? So if we don't have enough solar panel out there to create more energy for the plant, so that it can bring in and create its more sugars, overgrazing can definitely be detrimental. So I think you can up stocking rate on ground that's been fertilized with native pastures, but we just don't want to overdo it and overgraze. It's what we do after that really counts.
All right. When creating the carbon baseline, will excessive rainfall or drought in the prior year or two have much of an impact on the carbon base level?
I don't think it would have as much of an impact as most people think. So the soil carbon that we're actually testing for is not soil organic matter. So it is it's soil organic carbon, right? So it's a very stable form of carbon that's in the soil and can be there for many years. And so once we experience drought, we may not be sequestering as much, but I don't think we're losing it. It's an ebb and flow, right? So we have to really think about it's not going to wash away. It's not like our nitrates in our fertilizer. This is, it's not necessarily a salt. If you think of it in that form, it'll stay. It's very heat stable. It's very drought stable. What we really want to see is being able to have plant root and shoot growth.
Great. All right. How does annual burning of native pasture affect the carbon in the soil?
So annual burning, I'm not from an area where we do that. I know large swaths of Kansas that do practice that. Driving across and you see it every spring, March and April, they light them up, right? And I believe that it would not be suitable for a carbon program, specifically ours. Is it a decent practice? I truly believe that the growers that burn pastures do receive a benefit. There is definitely a benefit. However, in the market that we're playing in, I don't believe that our buyers would sign on to that practice. Now, what does it do? All of our soil cover ends up leaving temporarily, and then our buyers wouldn't want that. But I know, and we all know, that once we've burned those pastures, we've essentially reduced our soil cover, and then we allow this lush growth that comes back and rebounds very quickly, and a very, very common in the Flint Hills of Kansas. So I love to sign on to the practice. I don't believe the program would allow for it.
Is that something, Travis, that you could look at, adjusting methodology on moving forward? We know this space is evolving.
Yeah. So we definitely try to think of ourselves as not excluding growers, right? We don't want to exclude anybody. We want our producers to be able to take advantage of this program. And so every day we're looking at ways to get legacy growers in, people that have already adopted some of these practices that may not qualify today. But we look at different methodologies constantly. So we have a science team that is looking at those. They look at dairy and beef feedlot methodologies. So looking at different types of emissions avoidance and sequestration there. And then all kinds of agroforestry programs. So not only range and pasture or row crop, but many different areas that we look at trying to create a new additionality project.
I think it's important that we continue to do that, because we really, the agricultural space is new in this. And that's why, in our case, we've made the investment to have a very skilled science team that is able to take information from the field and, try to work with these entities to make sure that they understand that, number one, some things aren't practical to do. It's real world, right? I got this practice, but is that something I can really do? And is it something that makes sense on my ranch to do? And I think that's what's really unique, is being able to walk with these verification companies and to help them understand what's applicable in agriculture. So, it's a long-winded version to your question, Laura, but it's absolutely critical that we continue to inform them the benefits of doing that burning, and work through that. Are we there today? No, but this space is constantly evolving. And so I think that's where the real opportunity is to continue to educate and get some good data behind that to prove that, hey, this is something that makes sense. But as you know, this carbon sequestration piece, it takes a long time. So we have to spend a number of years to prove those theories, but something that we're very passionate about to do.
All right. Next question. Will your buyers look at small acres of property like 80 acres?
So we get that question a lot. And one of the reasons we look at larger properties is because we are going to essentially put a lot of our money into soil sampling up front. And so that's a high cost. However, we do want to include people and not exclude people because of just the size of their property. So at first, we didn't know how many growers we were going to have and what's the average size of the grower, and you know who's adopting our program and who do they look like, and you know what's their business on their range and pasture. Where is that 80 acres at, right? So we're looking at what if they're the neighbor to someone that did sign 1,000 acres? Well, that could possibly be something that we can work with, you know. But when I'm isolated out in West Texas and I've got an 80 acre producer that's really interested in joining the program, but he may be 300 miles from me. Well, that would be a really cost ineffective for the program if they're isolated away from my center of business where I've signed a high number of growers in an area. So, but say that 80 acres is right between two of our existing contracts, I don't think that would be enough to dissuade us away from signing up that grower, especially if he's right next door. It's right there. I mean, we could just pull in there and get it done. I think that could be an opportunity in the future.
We've also looked at, as Travis said, really closely at in given areas where obviously farm size is much smaller. And we have worked with, groups of folks that are within an area, and it's a little tougher to organize, obviously, but it has been something that, our folks that are on the sales side and both on the agronomy side have really worked together to try to bring those acres together. Because like Travis said, it's really just a logistics and a cost of doing business type of thing. But if we can pool some people together in a given area, then it works really well. So
worth a conversation for sure.
Absolutely.
So I have a question about the soil testing. Are those results shared back with the landowner? What do those results look like? Is this a traditional NPK type soil test? What kind of information do they learn from their pasture land?
So we get to learn the bulk density and the percent carbon within the soil. So that's essentially what we're testing is percent carbon and bulk density. And that allows us to do some algebra and figure out, what our equivalent carbon dioxide equivalent is and how many metric tons there are. And it's not like we're going to get our NPK CEC back. So, and it's very slow. That's the better news. It's slow. It could take 6 to 8 months to turn around those numbers. It's a very slow process. And the machines that do the testing are extremely expensive. And there's not very many of them in the United States today. So we've got soils labs that are cranking up, ready to test soil samples for us. And there will be, tens of thousands of soil samples that are going to be out there. And who are we using? Well, we're using a lot of university soils labs, and we've selected a few that we can participate in. And one of the things that they're giving us an advantage is, the soil carbon marketplace has kicked off a lot of education programs in the United States. And so they're getting to use it as an educational tool for their graduate students and undergrads. But not only do they get to test for the soil carbon, but they'll actually be able to map that out and do some different kind of graduate projects with those.
Great.
But yeah, it's soil carbon and bulk density.
Yeah, and how we deliver those results to our customers, is interesting. I mean, it's something that we also have to provide some education around that as well, because it's not like your standard, soil test and soil results. But that's how we will continue to move forward. Is that information obviously is available. It's just making sure that we provide the education around how to. It's just like anyone years ago that just started doing soil samples. You had to understand what those pieces were of that puzzle. It's the same as what we're doing, and so there'll be some education with it as well, just to make sure that folks kind of understand, hey, this is how it looks. But yeah, it's a little bit of a longer process, and it doesn't happen right away. So if you think about it in terms of zones, we will create a zone map for the properties, and those zones will end up going across different soil types or similar soil types. We have all of these maps that were created from starting in the 1920s and 1930s, all across the nation. A lot of the high density of our land has been mapped for soil type, and so that's been a project from, like I said, the 1930s all the way through the 1980s, going out and looking at each county and surveying all of those. So a lot of your soil maps can also be found at the USDA's website, Web Soil Survey. If you look that up, you can look at your different soil types. So and we all know that not all soil is created equal. So there will be sandier soils in areas, and we know that those will be lower in performance versus our higher density soils, our heavier clays. They have a propensity to perform higher when it comes down to carbon sequestration. So we zone map those out, and then you may be told, hey, you have 5 zones that go across your property, and this is the rate of sequestration across all 5 of those, or it may be less than that. And so, but yeah, it's how wide are we looking? Well, we're looking at, working with millions of acres. And today we're close to 1 million acres of signed contracts. And then we're going to be kicking off that soil sampling process pretty quickly.
So anyone interested in entering this market space or this opportunity, what kind of record keeping, what kind of data do they have to have up front to begin that conversation?
So me as a soil, an agronomist, I always think in terms of, yield, right? Well, we're thinking about, let's see about how robust our data collection is on the ranch. How closely are we looking at calving weight? Have we thought about calving weight? How much of of this data do we need? A lot of it is going to be practice based. How much are we feeding? A lot of our data on the ranch could be in forms of receipts. Where is this at? Especially when it comes down to someone that is just trying to get by and doesn't need to put all this stuff down on paper and put it into Excel. But then you've got all the way up to the producer that takes this data down daily and is very attuned to all of this. It could be, it's not things like, daily rainfall, it would be, say, I don't know, let me look over here. Let me grab my little sheet of paper. I can tell you really quickly. So for things like fuel usage, those are things that we look at that are on receipts, right? Fuel receipts fertilizer, overseeding, the seed and fuel receipts, those are good. But we look at as applied maps for fertilizer and seeding. So we have a couple of growers that have the ability to run over and grab our aerial applicators. Aerial applicators can provide us data, things that are commonly reported to the FSA office, those types of data. And then when we start looking at individual animal performance, that's where we start looking at, hey, here's our animal performance before. Here's a 3-year history of our animal performance. And then over the 10-year period, we can actually see if this program had a benefit in terms of animal performance. And now we're cooking with grease. So
yeah. So Larry, when you have that initial conversation and you sit across the table from someone, what do they have to give to you to qualify to enroll in the program?
Yeah, there's a number of things that we look at. There's on the ranching side, it's fairly basic. There's inventory, numbers. Look at number of live calves born and back that into a conception rate kind of to baseline some of those informations. There's not a lot of like specific individual weights and measures at this particular time that we collect. All that data is important, but it's a lot of grazing patterns. Like Travis said, if you're going to fertilize, we need to keep track of those information. But it's really a pretty basic process, but it really is more around inventory and movement of animals and how your operation is set up, especially if you're looking at the rotational grazing piece is some of those key pieces of metrics that we put together. It's kind of, it is a little bit, comical is probably not the best word, but when we started, the list was, I don't know, Travis, a mile long on what we were supposed to collect from a rancher. And we told them that that just wasn't going to happen. Number one, a lot of people, some of that information you don't have. Some of it people are very sensitive in sharing. We really try to not get too intrusive into that piece of it, I guess. It's really looking at inventory, and grazing patterns and the amount of animals you have. Breeds, breed of cattle can have some impact in it as well, just from a data collection standpoint. But it's really pretty basic, which I think is attractive. And that's something that's really critical is we do not share that data with anyone. It's used so that we can keep the baseline for your operation and to develop the best and the highest value carbon credit that we can based on the information that the registry requires us to collect. But we could also share that list and push that out to folks if they'd like to see what that specific list is. I think it would be important.
Yeah, I think that would be a great resource.
And it's something that I would like to offer as well as we as our time has went very quickly here. Just from a strict educational piece, our website has a lot of educational information, and with no obligation at all towards what looking at Agoro as a partnership with you. But I think that's the one thing that's really interesting, that the education part of this is so important, and there's a lot of good information there that can answer some questions, and also we're always willing to have those discussions as well. So
yeah, great to hear. So I did go ahead and launch the poll, guys, before everyone starts to hop off. Know that this conversation can continue to go on as long as, Larry and Travis are still with us. If you have any additional questions, we're glad to take those. Certainly want to thank everyone for joining us here tonight. Appreciate your time, and we hope that you've learned something from this.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. We still have a few on.
We do. We still have just a few on. I think everyone's answering and finishing up here.
Okay.
Any folks that we have left, if you'd like to ask a direct question, just let me know and I will unmute you so you can do so. Okay. All right. Well, if we don't have any additional questions, going to go ahead and end the poll here. Okay. All right. Again, thanks everyone for joining us here this evening. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions, please reach out to me at laura@gelvy.org. Be happy to answer those or pass those on. Did have a question about how can we get a recorded version. I will be sharing this recording with all of our attendees here tonight.
Perfect.
All right. Well, have a great evening, everyone. Oh, one more here. All right. No problem. Thanks a lot, Rick. All right. Well,
Thanks,
guys, I'll let
everybody.
you get back to your night. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks.
Hey, thank you.
Mm-hmm.